Welcome to Arc Temple of Ages, the beginning of an amazing adventure for the mind and soul. So without further ado, let's get into this. Alright, so I made a huge presentation for everybody that I think's time to share. So, the main focus of this and why I wanted to make it is there's so many things going on in our lives day to day, and not only that, but up in the heavens as well. And I wanted to try to bridge that gap and show what might be happening here to everyone in a way they might be able to understand, and especially how it's been portrayed through mass media. So, hi everybody, I'm James. I made this meme a couple years ago, and I just love how almost every day it just gets a bit more traction and relevant. And that this is going to go all over the place and be just about, not everything you could think of, but ooh-wee. This was the original title card for my first presentation I made, and a lot of it's about looking at all the characters and technology and events that are happening in our world, and then what we can start to do about it if we don't want to be part of it. And a big inspiration for me making this one is that, especially in Eastern mass media from Asia, there's so many big picture examples that I've been wanting to share with people, yet without the context, the build up, and all the slides and pictures, it just isn't the same. And before I go any further, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to all these people right here. Throughout my journey over the years, a lot of these people were amazing inspiration, and I wouldn't be here without them. And before I really get into the meat of the story, I want to set the framework and the general idea of how I'll be going about this and the themes of this presentation. A big part of it is that each part of this builds upon each other. There is no wasted slide in this entire presentation, and it all fits together in the end to form this bigger picture or tapestry or Lego set or however you want to see it. And I would say no matter how far it seems I go off the rails or kind of veer off to a new topic, that it will loop back around and become very relevant. And a lot of things will be mentioned multiple times. And that, like I've been saying, everything leads back to Rome, as they say. That this all is asking a particular question and has a focus on it, and that it all comes together, even if it's seemingly unrelated. Though most of this stuff follows patterns. And that's why I put most of this in, and this is a big part of what I would call my evidence, is that these archetypes and themes keep popping up over and over and over again. They might have a different face or appearance or, book cover. And things like the divine masculine and feminine and good and evil, these things just keep reappearing over and over and over. And that we're in a system that seems to want to balance them. And that they also have extremes at certain points. And a big part of this will be comparing the micro and the macro, and that they're really not that different in certain scenarios. And that will be slowly putting together the elephant in the room. Though, in my opinion, it's not the elephant in the room, it's the entire stampede going through our entire civilization. And that the big point is that no one's happy about this because our current civilization's built for us and not a giant stampede of everything you could imagine. And the way I'll be going about this is very structural, a lot like Clue. I'll be looking at the who, what, where, when, and why. And it might seem like a weird way to structure this presentation, though as it goes on, you'll see the bits being added on and the context being added, and it will all come together, just like in the game. And that the idea that one picture is worth 1,000 words, and that's why I made this presentation the way I did. I didn't want big paragraphs that I would just read off verbatim and you had to focus on. Instead, I want this to be a mental journey as well, and that currently there are about 800 slides, and I plan to add more to this. So this is going to be a lot of information. And that I ask that you please leave your baggage at the door and keep an open mind. That what you're seeing, you don't just keep thinking to yourself, well, this is right, this is wrong. Give it time to lay out its case and try to remember what I'm talking about, because like I said, I will repeat and come back to things. And a big focus of this is on pre-programming. I think the mind's like a machine, that if you put something into it, something comes out. And a big focus of that is the subconscious, because all of our subconsciouses are connected. So on a societal scale, we have to look at, what have we been putting into our minds? And that other people have messages for that as well. So I'm going to be moving very fast in this presentation and going over a lot of very big ideas without a lot of context or time to go over them. So that I'll be saying the names of things, so if you want to do further research, I suggest you do that on your own. Though I try to simplify this in a way that even if you don't have the full idea of everything I'm talking about, you kind of get the gist. And a big theme of this presentation I'll be talking about a lot is breaking the fourth wall. A way to imagine this is that that's a movie character and he's talking to the audience, like I'm talking to you right now. Like if you're reading a book and all of a sudden the character's like, hey, you reading the book. So that's breaking the fourth wall. I'll come back to that. And the biggest focus of all of this I'm asking is the why. Why are we here? But to get to that, we have to cover, where we're at, where we're going, what the past was, and, what the major forces in our world and energies are going towards. This is a Slipknot quote saying, I don't want to be right, but sometimes you are. So we're all waiting to see if it happens. And that's a large vibe of this presentation. I could have made this years ago. Yet, as I wait, the urgency to do it has grown. So, a part of me wishes I was wrong about just about everything in this and the destination, and that we could all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. Yet, that's not entertaining, and that's not where spiritual growth is. And that's, in my opinion, not what this place is. So, another thing is balance. About, you have to be, equal-footed, but not completely drowned. If it was an ocean. Yeah, I should probably just read the quote, but this is Sun Tzu basically saying, you have to know yourself, the enemy, and the battleground if you want to understand and succeed all of the time. And a big part of my thinking and why I'm presenting these things is I'm not saying that I'm certain these will happen. A lot of these things, if there was even like a 5 or 10% chance they were going to happen, in my lifetime, I would still want to talk about them and discuss them and maybe incorporate some of that into my life, because the cool thing about preparedness is that it all stacks upon each other. And a way to look at this philosophy is, if I was going to go camping in the woods and there were giant bears there, I would want to know that just thinking about and maybe preparing for a bear in the woods doesn't just magically manifest a bear in front of you. And that if you're not, you're just on the other extreme of trying to ignore reality even when it might be in front of your face. And this is something called reactive armor on tank. That it's built so if they get shot at, that those explode and stop the round before it hits the tank. The tank doesn't want to get shot at. It wants to go about its life, yet it's prepared to a point that if the worst does happen, it doesn't even have to consciously react. It's in an environment that it can stay at an optimal, healthy way without the bullshit of life, hitting it to its core. And an idea with life is that a horror movie is something that someone didn't think could happen that happened. With Jaws, they didn't think there was a giant shark. They don't think werewolves or ghosts exist, or, that there's a Texas Chainsawing Massacre guy. So, but then it happens, and you have front row seats to it, and in most cases, they're not prepared. And this is, as our reality is starting to break down in a lot of ways, and we're kind of looking at it going, huh? And I think deep down, a lot of us crave stability and kind of utopia. And that, unfortunately, I don't think that's really what this place is. Though we can reach that eventually. So there's no way to do this presentation without talking about my past. Because I keep looking back at it in the things I studied way before I was into any of these conclusions, that they keep just popping up. And I want to mention a few of them now because they will come back later. And when I was in middle school, I did a report on the Jaguar warriors of the Aztec Empire. And at the time, it was really cool, and I got to make a little costume. Yet the reality of it is that they're capturing people to sacrifice on top of a pyramid to appease the gods. And not only that, there's a movie called Apocalypto about an eclipse ritual ushering in a new age, and during the whole time he's being abducted by those very same Jaguar warriors. And this theme will keep popping up. And I was a huge nerd growing up. I read so many books and played so many video games, and I'll talk about each one of these here individually as the presentation goes on. And I want to make a point about this, that when I was a kid, these just seemed like video games. That there was nothing else really going on that was weird. And both these games right here are going to come back so much. And in the newest Matrix movie, they reincarnated Neo back into the Matrix as a game designer, making the Matrix games. So the truth of his reality was hidden in the very video games he was playing and making while he was asleep in the Matrix. And so later on in life, I was getting a cybersecurity degree in college. And there was a show around that time that came on called Sword Art Online, about a guy who put on a VR headset and he would be stuck in the game, and if you tried to take it off or if you died in real life, and to escape the video game, you had to beat it. And this got me thinking, along with things like Ready Player One, that in 10, 20, 30 years, if this keeps up with the technology we're making and manifesting, that waking people up and helping them escape virtual realities might become like the main focus and job of a cybersecurity expert. Because now that you're in the computer and the computer is in your head, or, close enough. And, that takes us back to the Matrix. But what I want to ask is, why is this happening? Why is Neo incarnated in a flesh suit that's trapped in a virtual construct by artificial beings? Like, why is this happening? And all this research really started with me with the 9/11 Alex Jones, Joe Rogan podcast, where Alex Jones basically says that interdimensional entities that we call angels, or the fallen, gave our elites, all this technology, and we're building our own technological prison to stop ourselves from naturally ascending past this place and being stuck here over and over as their plaything. And that was not my main focus at the time, yet ever since then, I've been looking into it, and I haven't really been able to stop looking at it. And this was, if I could point to really a starting point of where this focus started, this would be it. it was kind of funny. I jumped right over Alex Jones, right into David Icke, and my main focus was like, why are all these reptilian beings around? Over and over and over, in the symbolism, especially how they're enslaving humanity. And then, the rabbit hole just keeps going on and on and on. I start getting into the Bible and Christianity and learning about that. And a big thing with me was always, because my first perspective of life was technological, that it was very interesting starting to look at spiritual things, because the entire time I have the idea of, simulation theory and being stuck in a video game as I'm reading a book about a guy, thousands of years ago trying to tell people that there's way more to this and that there's more to their body and that they can ascend if they pass a spiritual test. So I want to tell a story. Not just about us or me, but about a ram that bites an apple. And the implications of that, since we're in the system with this energy as well. There's good and negative here, technology and magic. And this always makes me think of Genesis 3:22 and the number of skull and bones. That's like, geez, they ate the fruit. They're going to start making virtual reality video games because that's kind of what this is, Use whatever term you want. When you end up describing it, it's very similar. It keeps going back. But we have to look at this because we're still in the infant phase of this. And, they used to be the size of buildings, and now they're in your pocket, and next they want to put it inside of you. And we're watching... This is kind of the stampede I was talking about earlier, that it's not just artificial reality or virtual reality. And you should watch Ready Player One if you haven't, because it really explores how this goes and how it's two worlds that are merging together and how it changes everything and how you have to start bridging the gap. Quantum computing, fusion energy, trying to capture the power of the sun itself. And that, I'll go into this later, that this entire next level of crazy sci-fi technology, it needs fusion. Like, that's the last piece we're missing before this can happen. The Terminator movies. We just don't have good enough batteries yet. I mean, we have all the other mechanical systems for the most part built. And then you have things like CERN, genetic engineering, biometrics, increasingly small smart devices that they want to put into the brain, which they've already done. Putting that increasingly small technology everywhere. And not only that, but trying to overlay it on the reality itself, even if you're not wearing like a virtual reality helmet or have the technology inside of you, they'll just project it on top of it anyway through like a 3D fractal hologram, like this reality might be. Excuse me. And I love this meme. And I don't mean it in like a scary way, but just that these are the tools being used in our story by the forces in our world. And that these things have implications, and that, cell phones used to be a brick in your hand, but, now they're more powerful than a smart or a supercomputer at the time of the brick cell phone. And they're in your pocket, and almost everyone has one. It's changed the world, whether you see that as good or bad, as it will continue to do so in the future. Yet a lot of these things are in their infancy, so when they really start to hit their stride, that's really when the world's going to start to change. And that's a good bridge into what... So I talked about the tools, and now I want to talk about the house we live in. Our entire world. And this is kind of an interesting sidestep, and I'm going to cover a lot of things here that will add on to this that I'll come back to later, and I'll give a source where you can go to find this, because I'm just going to briefly go over the surface of this. That we live in a closed system that has a water and a fire cycle. And that most stories, biblically and of ancient societies, is that we've already gone through the flood because we live in a 70% water world and 30% land world. But with all the fire and plasma and heat, it'll get rid of that 40% water and we'll go back to like a more desert world. And not only that, we're in the technological water age where we don't really have the extra energy, so we don't really have magic or really strong manifesting powers like we used to. So we have to build technology to kind of build in the gap. So, and this idea was also explored in Game of Thrones, that it started out as just like a basic medieval fantasy where everything was very similar to our mainstream history. Yet then you start throwing in dragons, the dead coming to life, things coming through an ice wall from the outside, like all sorts of crazy things. And not only that, I just loved, I found this Smithsonian video of a dragon and Apache, the two worlds meeting each other. And that almost every ancient religion and, empire had a model close to this, of a closed system. And this has been covered a lot. Stephen King did a book about it. The Simpsons did a movie about it. And not only that, there's a meme about The Simpsons that there's so much pre-programming in this show that, like, almost everything that you think of, you can, like, point back to The Simpsons and be like, oh, The Simpsons did it, even with, like, wacky ideas. And that if we are in a closed system, it's a lot like a pressure cooker. We're currently being crushed down by pressure, and the gases are waning because they aren't being recharged. Yet the idea of this cyclical event is that it kind of opens up the vent and doesn't repressurize the world, but it like reoxygenates it, like rejuvenates it, because we're like in a stale airplane. It's all just being recirculated. We need like to open the door and let all that in. But if you do that while the pressure's high, everyone's stuff starts flying around the airplane and no one's having fun. And not only that, if you look at mainstream science, everything used to be bigger. And not only that, there used to be more oxygen in the environment. So if a closed system opened up and all of a sudden all these gases come flowing in, then very soon all these things are going to start growing gigantic. And not only that, the plants will do this as well. And if there's plasma, which I'll get into later, can bring consciousness to things, then those will start coming to life as well. And, even not so long ago in mainstream history, they go, hey, look, everything used to be 2 or 3 times the size when we had 2 or 3 times the oxygen. And you could probably live longer, too. And the movies Jumanji and Zathura are about these two worlds coming together. And that's where all their weird animals come from, is from this other world. They come in here because, now the environment's different. We can't have all those giant animals right now because the pressure will crush them. So we have more of a sci-fi experience, yet it'll flip back so it can be more of a giant Jumanji world. And I wanted to kind of cover this. There's a movie on Netflix called The Dead Don't Die, where the moon starts releasing plasma and it causes the dead to rise. And one of the weirdest things about this movie is that some of the main characters in the movie know they're in a movie. I took some of the quotes from it, that the theme song of the song written by Sturgill Simpson for the movie, they play in the movie. And Bill Murray says, like, why does this sound familiar? And the other guy below him's like, well, it's the theme song of the movie. And later they're having a conversation that Bill Murray only got the scene cards that he was in, yet Adam Driver below him had read the whole script and was telling him that. Like I was reading the script this entire time. And the only one that survived, really, was the guy that was living outside society. Because our society isn't built for zombies or any of it, in my opinion. Like what I was talking about earlier, Jumanji. And, like, these people, they don't make it because they're just in some crappy little cardboard hotel room. And it's kind of funny that this is actually an alien that gets to leave as well. She was trapped here because the system was closed, but then, when the sky opens up and all the energy starts coming in, she could leave and her UFO comes down and picks her up. And not only that, she worked at the morgue and she was painting people with like clown faces. So they directly link clowns with space elves. It's very interesting in a fourth wall breaking zombie movie about plasma bringing dead people to life. And like I was saying earlier, not only is it zombies, it'll bring machines back to life. And you can think of this like the mind of God opening up, or you could look at the dark side of it like the bottomless pit opening up. This thing opens up and it changes the environment. And if we were in the mind of God, you could imagine how it might look, like if you were in a neuron, or how it is in like Men in Black with all the marbles. And that, a lot, if you're an ancient person and you can only write this on stone, I mean, you only can contextualize this so much with the language you had, and it doesn't translate very well. So there's all these mythos about this in, different religions and things like that, but they're all basically trying to say the same thing. And at this point, I want to talk about plasma for a minute, that it's the fourth state of matter. And that to me, it's basically magic. That it can heal, it can destroy, it can redo molecular bonds so you can turn lead into gold. Through quantum tunneling and positioning, you can instantly transfer information. I think it's what the shape-shifting angels of light are made out of and things like that. I mean, it makes so much sense that like you can go through any matter and be anything if you have the energy. So it's a very interesting idea. And not only that, that energy can be used to terraform our world into something else. And that this idea is present a lot, especially in like biblical texts and things like that. This is a fun little one, that in ancient mythology there was the idea that Zeus raised secret bees and the honey fed him, and that plasma can actually sustain you, and that it leaves behind residue. And this idea is in Ghostbusters, that the ghosts leave behind slime. And I don't have a picture of it, but in the second movie, the slime actually can bring inanimate objects to life because it has energy in it. And there's also this idea of the land of milk and honey, where you can go live off milk and honey, and maybe it wasn't just, milk and honey. Maybe those were the words for plasma residue and things like that they didn't have words for. And then we have things like fairies and will-o-wisps that they say are made of fire, but that's just flying plasma. We have ideas of like Tinkerbell and things like that, and that lightning's attracted to you. So all these lights and things like that, and that might explain things of the past and all this metal and, things that look like lightning rods in fashion and architecture, because there was all this energy in the environment. Not only that, in this model, the sun and the moon become 7 times as bright, and this is how would help melt all the water. And a few months ago, they said there's a yellow brick road they found under the ocean. And if the sun was 7 times as bright, it melts the ocean, or evaporates the ocean, and then it heats up the mud and all the muck, and then it makes a yellow brick road. And that's the same as the Wizard of Oz, that this yellow brick road leads you somewhere. And the idea is that the sun and the moon will spiral inward towards the center of the earth. And that's biblically supported as well, that people go towards the north, and then all the evil people are burned away by fire. And you can go in this, that in the middle of the earth, especially on ancient maps and things like that a lot of people used to say there's a black mountain with the Garden of Eden in it at the center of the earth, where we think the North Pole is. And that, the Fountain of the Youth and the Garden of Eden are up there. And not only that we were kicked out of it, and then the cherubims with swords of fire kept us out. So you could also see that as, the plasma fire, the angels made of plasma being like, hey, you can't go back there, until the doors open or the environment changes. And this is a place that the idea of this model goes that you can hide there during this cataclysm or the height of it, and then you can repopulate in Eden, basically, and then you're kicked back out into the new world after the worst part of it. And so it's seen as like a castle or a house, or like a black mountain with plasma over it in the center of the earth, which is also, you can kind of see the Disney logo as that. And not only that, but it connects to the center of the earth. And there's a lot of movies about that. So it's kind of like this safe hiding spot you can go to. Another thing is that if there's all this plasma running around, the idea is it turns on your DNA. And not only that, you can live longer. But also, if you take the idea of like you are what you eat, this leads to hybridism. And a world of like minotaurs and centaurs and things like that. And this is a show from Japan where everyone all of a sudden gets superpowers. And this is like the first guy they ever show, and he's the first villain, and he's like, hey, I ate too much crab and I turned into a crab guy. And growing up, there were these books called Animorphs where aliens give these children powers to turn into animals and back. So this idea, and you go back to the hieroglyphs in Egypt, and Saint Christopher in Christianity, there's a whole bunch of pictures of him as a dog person. And then you add in like werewolves and all that. And even in modern society, we have people with hair disorders that grow horns. And we're surrounded by statues all over the world that are from ancient times of hybrid beings. And another interesting angle of all this is the space one. So it's like, if we're in a closed system, what are they doing? And what are they doing with all this? And the idea of that is there's a movie called Don't Look Up, where Leonardo DiCaprio finds out that there's going to be the end of the world. There's going to be this huge cataclysm. And at the end of the movie, all the rich people evacuate Earth and go to a different world. And all the middle management or demigod people get left behind to restart the new world. So if we take this model that we're trapped inside here, but it opens up, all the really rich people now all have the training and technology just to blast off and go somewhere else. Because the idea to this is, in the world, all the giants and superheroes and all that, like, the rich people, like, can't control that. They have to go to the water world where everyone's lost their powers and the times, the lifespans are decreased and everyone's lost their memory. So, and not only that, but telepathy. That you have all this energy, you can actually communicate through that potentially. And if there was that, then you can't really lie as much. So they want to go somewhere where they can thrive, and this gives them a chance to go somewhere else. And this also matches all the mythos of beings coming here after a cataclysm or a flood. It's a cyclical cycle. And I just want to say all that right there. If you want any more of that in any way, there's a channel on YouTube called J Dreamers where this guy has hundreds of hours of all this in much fancier presentations than I make. He goes in the etymology, the literal physics and science of it. Like, he knows plasma physics. Like, he's been researching this for like 20 years. He has books about it that he just came out with, pictures. He talks about truth in movies. And that's where I got a lot of this part of it. He has one of the best unifying theories of conspiracies I've ever found, called the Plasmapocalypse. So I just wanted to give him a shout out right here. I didn't get a chance to ask him about it, but I didn't really take any of his videos or his work, and I want to give him all the credit for that. And I just want to say here that we may be trapped in a fish tank or a construct, but I do think there's a big ocean out there somewhere, and that this is kind of like a testing ground, so that it doesn't get out and muck up other things, especially when you start to see the things I'm going to get into later on. And just the whole idea of, the throne of God, angels, cherubims. I mean, that all looks like plasmid to me right there. So it's and then anything sufficiently advanced, you can't tell from magic because it's just so crazy. Like, you can put scientific words to this, but what if you don't have that scientific background? Like, how do you describe this? What do you think this is? So, and this, I want to transition this into The Watchers. This was a movie that came out recently. It's kind of more the dark side of it, that the fallen angels are trapping people in this place and they watch them every night. And that's their entertainment. And not only that, but even, the good angels are watching. And if you look at the biblically accurate angels, they're covered in eyeballs. And I'll go in more context to this later, but here's one from a video I found of it's watching all these video screens, which really matches up. And, look at the architect from The Matrix. He's a shape-shifting being surrounded by a bunch of screens watching all different realities. And here we are, sitting watching a black screen as I sit in front of a black screen talking to you. Santa's watching us. And so much of our world and the richest among us are entertainment. Like, that is such a big part of our culture. And it's interesting to ask the question that if this energy starts to enter our environment more and things start to change and technology grows, that these stories start to come to life. And that's what I was talking about earlier with the horror movie, is that, like, what if the living story is more focused on that? And not only that, we're directors and actors at the same time. There's the higher self, and then there's the boots on the ground, which is why I wanted to talk about this so much. And that, not only that, so many of these things have been put into our subconscious. These archetypal tales of good versus evil and everything in between. And kind of brings me to the idea is that it's good to be served tea, yet what if you're the tea being served? Or what if you're the entertainment? For the messed up fallen angels that trapped you in reality. I love Starship Troopers. I love to watch it. How do you think it'd feel to be Rico right there? And this is a meme from that's kind of popped up recently, where it's like, hold on, let him cook. And it always reminds me of, in the Bible, during when the seals are being opened, the souls at the foot of the throne of God are like, how much longer is this gonna happen? Like, holy moly. So, this brings me to this. I found this video while I was making this second part of the presentation, and it's this really goofy dance video at the beginning. Yet the more I looked at, the more I realized it does such a good job at encapsulating so much of what I'm going to talk about. So I wanted to share it. That it starts with, this came out within, I think, 2 weeks of all those car-sized drones that were over the eastern seaboard and military bases, and, that they won't share what it is or where it's going or where it came from. And in this, it's, a gray alien piloting it, but it's doing dance moves. And then the Men in Black show up. And the Men in Black are taking orders from the Illuminati, who are taking orders from whoever that creepy statue is of. And they end up knocking down the satellite. And they go back and they reverse engineer it to give them fusion energy so they can open up a literal Stargate to the spiritual realm. And it's not in the picture here, but they reference Operation Bluebeam with this as well. And it says, it starts going into all these like biblical ideas, like the dragon is coming, the stars will fall from the sky, and there'll be all this chaos. But it's not only that, this is happening as a time loop of a soul that's continuously reincarnating into matter to try and warn people of this biblical event so that they can prepare and not fall into fear and despair and things like that. And that he keeps going back and back and back, and that he's not returning to the light. And that this was him before he died and reincarnated as an alien, which I find so funny because there's a lot of conspiracy theories that the gray aliens are us from a different future. And the interesting thing is, in this video, and I'm going to go into this, there's many more examples of this, that if the aliens or cryptids or weird stuff in our reality start coming out to the point that average people are seeing them, that it trips this apocalypse or this phase change. I believe in the Bible, before the flood happened, that the giants were mostly gone. And the problem was that there were basically just hybrids everywhere, messing things up, and weird technology. So that was like the main reason. So like when this weirdness starts getting out, it resets it every time. And not only that, but people start losing their memories, and people get put under additional time loops. And not only that, wait, there's more. When this happens and they unlock this fusion technology, like I said, we're in a closed system, but it's like it opens up. It's like we're in a dark forest and we light a flashlight, and all of a sudden other people can come to play. And this is from the video, and it reminded me a lot of Independence Day. That we started putting the signal out, and then somebody picked up and wanted our stuff. And not only that, but Independence Day has aliens with these beams of plasma that they're using to destroy the Earth. So I want to talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe here, because if we're talking about the West, this is one of the biggest cinematic projects ever made. And if we're talking about mass pre-programming into the subconscious, like, this is the pinnacle. This is what they spent the most money on to put into the heads of the average person in the West. And it all started with a normal world. Tony Stark's just doing a missile demonstration in the Middle East, but he gets captured, and bingo, bango, bongo, he makes a miniature fusion reactor. And one of my points is that, like, Adam Savage has made a bulletproof Iron Man suit. The only thing we're really missing is the fuel. And as the Marvel Cinematic Universe goes on, it goes from just people in their world with their technology to space aliens, nanotechnology, literal magic comes back, and portals, and just a whole bunch of different kind of, it's not just a human-looking alien, like an elf. Oh, it's all, it's a talking raccoon and all this stuff. And it all mashes together. And we're going to be talking about Loki a lot in this presentation. But he first pops out in this movie, in the Marvel Universe primarily, and he captures the Tesseract, which is a blue plasma cube with infinite energy. And he uses this infinite energy to open up a portal in space and time, and it looks exactly like CERN with the 8 points, and a bunch of fine-looking chaps come on through. The next Avengers movie is about the AI uprising, and adding technology, to the interdimensional portal beings. And then the final part, and part of the series before it got all really weird, Endgame, was basically how I would equivalent this to Armageddon. That past, present, and future are all colliding. There's all these different worlds coming together and portals for this giant battle against good and evil. And after that, they kind of reboot the series, but they keep building upon this theme that in most of the Spider-Man movies coming out, that they use an actual particle accelerator to break open reality. So there's 5 Spider-Mans in one reality because they all got pulled from their home reality. And not only did they make an animated movie about this, then they made it with all the live action actors over as well. And we'll get to this theme later of this sequential reincarnation of the same archetypal character. Like, these are all the archetypes of Spider-Man, but they're all in different time periods, but then they all get mashed up because the physics of their world was messed up. And they haven't only done this, but they went even farther with a show called What If, with, like, what if Captain America was female? And, like, they keep going further from source and making it more ridiculous from what it was. Like, on the right here, those were the original actors from Spider-Man, and those are the new ones. Like, you had these, clean-cut rich people in New York, and now they're, a bunch of average nerds, basically. Which, I'm not saying what's good or bad, I'm just saying it's been changing as it goes. And not only that, as they went more into the multiverse idea, it started adding these very Cthulhu-like elements. And she's the villain, and I'll go more about this later, about how the new archetype of the villain is the corrupted feminine. And she is basically lucid dreaming through different realities and sending giant tentacle monsters so she can make her dream come true and, find artifacts. And, she's going through realities through their dreams. But not only that, portals as well. And, like, she meets different versions of herself. And this was an interesting point in the movie that Doctor Strange had to merge and accept and then kind of get control over death to, save the day. And I might go into that more later. But as the Marvel movies go on, they increasingly go into this idea of, like, interdimensional shadow demon monsters invading your reality. And recently they've made a Loki TV show where he goes from being the trickster god to the god of storytelling and reality creation. And a big point of the show is, like, he's in the mind of God. And they keep trying to show this over and over in the movie. And there's also a show about this called Severance that I really like, that kind of goes into that same idea of, like, being in the mind of God. And, they show it as branches on a tree, yet they're plasma streams. So it's a lot like the neurons and electricity firing in your minds between all the different ideas and things like that. And not only that, that they can, from a certain point, see all these together. So this is a later Marvel movie looking at the original Marvel movie in the movie itself. It's fourth wall breaking. And it's not only in this, but it's in things like Power Rangers that, there's a clash up of all the different archetypes that were given. And DC did this as well, along with Marvel recently. So basically, the superhero in the middle with the red costume right there, Flash, can run so fast with his electricity or plasma that he can reset realities. And they have a couple movies follow this. And, he meets the evil version of himself. And what ends up happening is a lot of these timelines are so dark that they want to reset it and forget their trauma. So they end up doing that, but they end up doing this through magic as well. That's Constantine, and like his power is literally magic, and it starts the Crisis on Infinite Earths, where they have all these multiverses. They have all these Supermen, but this giant blue wave of plasma is wiping them out. And the only way to stop them is to link up and have good vibrations. And no fear. It's very interesting. But it eventually gets to the point where demon shadow monsters start materializing out of nowhere. And not only that, but these giant robots that are kind of like the day the Earth stood still, that create the blue plasma that wipes out realities. And the way to look at these guys is they're almost like a cleanup service on a computer. Like, imagine you're playing a game and you're like, oh, I don't like how this game turned out, so I'm just going to open a new game, but you never close the old game, really. And it keeps just branching off new games, so eventually some part of your computer has to go in and be like, okay, get rid of that old one, that old one, that old one. And that's just what's happening here. But because it's so contextualized, they don't look at it like that. And they find out the solution to this is to return to the Prime. So that there's only one timeline, one Batman, one Superman. And that I would say we're watching this breakdown happen from the Prime source. And it's kind of interesting that in one of the most recent movies, Wolverine, the guy who, self-regenerates and can't die, saves a reality from breaking down by harnessing energy and kind of making the Jesus T-pose at the same time. And this movie also has Deadpool, which is known as the fourth wall breaking superhero. Like, he'll talk to the audience in the movies, and not only that, he's one of the goofiest superheroes and most vulgar. So he represents like the degradation of the seriousness that the series used to represent. I'm a big fan of it because I like the humor, but it's a great example to show, how we went from this serious world to this clown show, and how it not only is it a clown show, but it's a fourth wall breaking clown show that we're starting to see, the imperfections of reality. And as it connects with others, it's very interesting. This also happens in the Austin Powers movies, that it's this clean-cut British guy, but then by the third movie, he's with Foxy Cleopatra, and it's disco, and it's all this weird stuff. And not only that, in the third movie, there's Tom Cruise playing Austin Powers, and Austin Powers is watching a movie of Austin Powers in the movie of Austin Powers while you're watching Austin Powers. And as the movies are going on, you can see this with Dr. Evil and Mini-Me. That there's this smaller, weirder, cartoonish version of what was the original, and they're going into a time machine right now, so they're going back into duality, and every time they do it, it just keeps making it weirder and weirder. And in the second movie, Austin Powers has to save himself. And it's very interesting because the movies are basically like the Trinity. That he's the son, and in the first movie he saves the Divine Feminine, and in the second movie he saves himself to save the Divine Feminine, and in the final movie he has to save the son has to save his father. And his father's seen as like him and better than him in every way. And you can even see he has like the generative male force symbol as a necklace. So, he is the son, or, the father of the son. And he has to be saved from Goldmember, or, you have Osiris and then Cleopatra, in duality. It's happening over and over and over. And not only that, the final showdown of that movie is inside a giant submarine of Dr. Evil. So it's like Dr. Evil in the mind of God in this like weird fractal, story and movie and thing we're all viewing. So I'm going to stop part 1 right there, and we'll continue back part 2 with the Wood Green Dragon. So thank you for joining me with part 1, and the next one should be up soon. Thank you.